If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what are some creepy encounters you've had? A few years ago when I was 15, there were these abandoned houses down the road from my campground in New Hampshire. The first one was heavily destroyed by a big storm or flood. The second one was completely boarded up. We decided to go in the first one and just the entire pressure changes immediately. There were no bugs, nothing was covered in mold, and it felt like something was there. The creepy part was that in the first house, we all, 5, could see one window of the second house not boarded up inside. Someone checked outside and that same window was still boarded up. As we were leaving the first house, there was a figure in the window of the second, looking directly at us. We felt the temperature drop even more and we all just booked it out of there. I can still see the figure shape sometimes. While working at a Jimmy John's, I did bike delivery and I just got back from a delivery with this lady walking in the store behind me. She asked for a coworker, by first and last name. He was working but out on delivery, which we explained to her. Deliveries don't take long, so he was to return within 5 minutes. She said it was fine and let him know his mom stopped by, then she left. My coworker came back about 5 minutes after and we told him about his mom stopping by, to which he replied, "My mom died when I was 3. We were all a little weirded out. This wasn't his hometown, which was 5 hours away. And going on 9 years later, we never seen or heard about this lady again. I was camping in rural America, exploring the 10-ish miles around the house I was renting. Just going for big triangles out from my house and back, if that makes sense, to explore for fun. Sometimes I would find myself going through subdivisions, other times just the woods and the occasional farm. This time it was a fairly large patch of forest with a few scattered houses and roads. I had stopped for the evening and set up my tent, sleeping mat, and bag. I had my backpack in the tent and decided to have a fire as it was starting to get pretty cold at night. After the sun had set and dinner was eaten, the fire had begun to die down. I was ready for some good sleep after a long day of hiking. I was waiting for the fire to go out as I like to be very careful, don't want to burn down someone's backyard. When the normal bugs or whatever makes sound at night decided to stop. I didn't think much of it as I was moving around not paying attention, but when I stopped and relaxed a bit it was obvious something was wrong. I sat for maybe 5 minutes in the eerie silence, when I heard something move off out in the woods about as far away as you could see in the day. A few minutes later it was much closer. My mind was racing with Skinwalker and Wendigo stories. I checked my pistol to make sure I had one in the chamber. I got my AKM from the tent and loudly cycled it. It made me feel a bit better, as in the Middle East nothing lived after 37.62 by 39 rounds, and I had brought 90 and 3 mags but had already used 30 for fun as I hiked the past few days. However, my mind yet again went back to the Skinwalker stories about bullets not working. I quickly threw more wood on the fire and got it going again. Still sitting in the silence, I heard some more movement just outside of the glow of the fire. I shouted out to whatever was there that I was just camping and would be gone in the morning, but if you come closer I will shoot. The movement stopped for a few more minutes and once again I was left to the silence. Then nearly behind me more movement. I turned to face it and still could not see anything. For hours I felt like I was being circled by something. Sometimes it was slow footsteps on the dry leaves, then silence and the feeling of being watched. Other times it was fast footstep. When I shined my torch at the noise I still could not see anything, as I probably would have shot if I had, even if it was just an animal. The worst part was the silence. When out camping off trail you always hear things, but never for me had the background noise turned off. It was quieter than a snowy forest and the bugs had just suddenly stopped. It was 2 to 3 a.m. when whatever was there stopped moving in my camp. I figured I might be able to relax and get some rest. Then off maybe 100 to 150 meters I heard some cows making cow noises, normal moos, nothing wrong with that. However, over the course of 30 minutes the cows started to sound different, agitated and scared. They were making odd sounds I had never heard cows make before. I grew up in a somewhat rural part of Cambodia and kind of know what cows normally sound like, but these were totally different sounding. They were making sounds that I could only describe as haunting, distorted moos and bellows. They were making these calls for at least an hour before I had enough freaky shit for one night and packed up camp in the dark. I used my compass and where I had marked camp that evening and continued on my way in the dark, AKM in hand. I ended up coming across a road early in the morning, just getting light. I put my pack down off the road and got my sleeping bag out, put it in the bivvy and took a much needed nap on my pack. I was woken up by very southern nice man who had pulled over to make sure I was okay. It was one hell of a night and one of the longest time periods freaky shit that went on while I was out. I have heard and seen other stuff, but nothing ever lasted that long. Not much was embellished, it all actually happened and I told it pretty much how I tell it to my friends around the campfire. It might have all been my own head playing tricks on me, but it felt so real. When I was around 6, we moved to a small house on the outskirts of a mountain town. My mom and I, F, were both diagnosed with the flu. My dad worked a few hours away and came home on the weekends. Since we were in a dark/unlit area, my mom made my dad change all locks and screw our windows shut. Since we hadn't lived there long, we didn't know who to trust as friends yet. My dad met a man who lived across the road and straight up the hill from us. The man came down to our house to work on things with my dad often enough, but seemed really odd. Like he was hiding something. About 3 months in is when we were diagnosed with the flu and both were home in bed. My dad had just left for the week, so my mom and I were the only ones home. Around 10 a.m. or a bit before, we could tell by the way the sunlight hit that side of the house, that man ran through our house and jumped on top of the bed standing over us. My mom screamed and it woke me up. I could hear sirens. She yelled, "What are you doing?" He screamed, "Why in the hell can't I get out of this window?" As he was tugging with full force. I could hear hard footsteps running onto our porch. My mom yelled and said, "We screwed them shut. Get out of my house." As he ran out the way he came in, I snuck a look out of the window and watched as the police tackled him. My mom ran to speak to the police and found out that he was caught manufacturing meth since it blew up and caught half of the hill/small mountain on fire. I asked my mom when I was around 25, 30 now, why she kept calm besides yelling at him. I had hid my face under the cover so I couldn't see much. She said she's seen that he was cut up and had twigs in his hair, half of his skin was burned and he seemed weak, as well as he was only wearing a pair of smallish shorts and tennis shoes. She knew he had no weapon visible. He likely ran through the trees and brambles to get to our house. That was the day that my dad learned not to trust everyone he meets and to always remember to lock the door. When I was in high school, I'm a female and was like 15 at the time, our school would send some of us to a community college for college credits. Half of our day was at the high school, and the other was at the college. When we were done with our classes, some of my friends and I would wait for the bus to either take us back to our school or to get picked up. I was waiting there alone one day, my class ended before my friends, and then a man came up very close to me and asking me questions about myself, or for me to show him things and follow him. He also was just getting too close to me. Anyway, my friend got to the building and noticed what was happening right away and he tried to help me. He had to sort of lodge himself between that man and I. He even made the excuse that we needed to get to class, and walked me to the other side of campus. That man kept following me, and would still get so close to me, literally trying to breathe down my neck. My friend still would try to prevent him from getting close to me as we walked. Eventually, when we got to a part of campus with more students, that guy ran off. I was so scared because that man would not leave me alone and tried to get me to go in the restroom with him. I don't know what I would have done had my friend not showed up, but that man really creeped me out. A different time at that same school, I had accidentally fallen asleep. There were many couch-like seats everywhere and hardly anybody was there, which normally I would not do. This was literally a one-time thing. A different friend was on the seats next to me and thought nothing of it because a lot of people would sleep there. My friend went to the restroom for a bit. This man saw me sleeping alone and came up to me. He started to shake me and yell to wake up. He stayed and talked to me, asking if I was a virgin and questions like that while I tried to process what the heck was happening. My friend came out of the restroom and saw what was happening. She came up with an excuse for us to go. Again, creepy to me. I guess I'm not the best with these situations. Some years ago I went to 7-Eleven with my then boyfriend. He went to the falafel place next door while I picked up some snacks. I was just leaving the 7-Eleven when a strange man asked me what I was doing that night. I said, hanging out with my boyfriend. He said, "Wanna come to a Halloween party with me instead?" I was nervous and this caught me off guard, so I kind of nervously laughed, said no thank you and walked away from him into the falafel place next door. I told my boyfriend about it and stuck close to him leaving the falafel place. As we were walking back to my BF's place, I saw the stranger driving away in a white van. A few weeks later I saw him on the bus and pretended not to notice him. Luckily he didn't seem to notice me, or much around him at all. He seemed to be on drugs and was banging on the bus window and muttering to himself. This story I'm about ready to tell is hard to believe, I know. But hey, maybe you'll believe me. It was around 5 to 7 years ago. My cousin's family from the city went and visited our house and stayed overnight. Me and my family live in the countryside, so our village, though suburban-like, is surrounded by vegetation. 10 years ago, though, the land where my village currently is used to be a huge sugar plantation like 20 kilometers across. We finished having dinner and I invited my cousin, who was a bit younger than me, for a walk outside. This was around 8 p.m. By the end of our little stroll around the village, I looked up at the sky to be greeted by thick clouds blocking out the stars. That's when I noticed something strange. Hovering lower than the clouds that were already low in the sky was this black thing. It wasn't a hole in the clouds revealing the night sky above it. It was very noticeably a thing. It was like the size of a fighter jet but solid black. It wasn't moving at all, just hovering. It only caught my attention when I looked up because I couldn't hear anything. It didn't make a sound at all. Like zero. The weirdest part of it was that it seemed to know that people on the ground could look at it, and it made it so that it was hard to see and make out what it really was. Sounds strange, I know. What I mean is that when you look at it head on, it's like it's trying to change its shape subtly, so your brain has a hard time understanding the nature of the object, but when you have the object in your periphery, it's as still as an image. It's like it doesn't want your eyes to focus on the object. I called the attention of my cousin to the blackest object I've ever seen, and he just doesn't understand it too. Like when you see something in the sky like a plane or a bird, you understand it. Your brain recognizes it even if you just glanced at the thing. But this, stare at it for as long as you like, it doesn't want you to figure it out. It was just black. My friend and me, 15 and 16 at the time, missed the last train home after a party, and after 2 hours of walking in the freezing cold decided to hitchhike. A car with 2 men in their 30 stops. And I already got a weird feeling. But we were really cold, and my friend reassured me that nothing will happen if we are together. So we got in their car and drove off. I was next to the driver and the other dude got in the back with my friend. Red flag. They asked where we want to go, and I quickly told them a place near our homes but not directly there. They started asking if we have boyfriends. I lied and said yes, we have very jealous boyfriends. And mentioned out strong brothers, etc. But they started to get touchy. And said it's fine if our boyfriends don't know about it. The dude in the back tried to kiss my friend, and the driver's hand was wandering up my legs. He drove right inside a forest pathway and parked there. I was talking about our boyfriends. We were both shaking and visibly frightened. The driver touched my breast and tried to kiss me. But the guy in the back suddenly told him to stop. And asked him if he can't see that we are afraid. They argued a bit, and the driver tried to get us to say that we are fine. But in the end, the guy in the back won the argument, and they drove us out of the forest and dropped us off with the guy in the back apologizing and the driver first trying to get me to stay, and when I said no, he tried to get my friend to stay. So I used to walk home / to Target when it was really dark. There's this area on the way to Target that's pitch black and no lights. I loved walking at night. It calmed me down, and the views were amazing. This changed when a man ran up on me. At first I didn't think much of it since there's always someone jogging for exercise. But the situation changed when I looked back and this person was running full speed. Not in my general direction, towards me. Even if that person wasn't running towards me, no one runs full speed like that. I quickly became the fastest man in the world and made it home in 3 minutes. I'm not really sure if I was being chased, but no one runs at full speed like that, at night, at another person's general direction. I go for lots of night walks, and my area is a bit sketchy, so hell, I have tons of stories I could tell. Snowing night about 2 years ago. Was going for a walk around 3 a.m. I was walking on a narrow pathway in a pretty rural area. It was the middle of the night, so it was absolutely pitch black. I could see absolutely nothing but kept walking straight. I reached an area of the pathway where a small light in the distance lit up the path a little more so I could see my direction better. That's when I saw something obstructing my pathway. There was some sort of object in the direction I was walking, a pretty tall object, looked like a sign or something, so I kept walking. As I got closer, I started making out more about this object, and I realized it was actually the silhouette of someone standing there. There was literally a fucking person standing in my way, 3 a.m. on a dark path. I probably stood there, completely frozen for a few seconds. Trying hard to process what I was seeing, and what the fuck to do. The figure I was seeing didn't move either. Nope, I turned the hell around and walked straight the way I came, no hesitation. When I was in 5th grade, my family visited our home country for summer vacations. There, we joined my mother's sister's families. They had their husbands with them, and only one aunt has a daughter, so she was there too, and took a 3-day train trip to visit their cousin in another city. The trip itself was amazing, and I am still glad for it, because it was on this train journey that I became close with this cousin of mine. I had always been an extremely shy kid, and even in the family I would shy away from everyone, including cousins. So, this was important for me because we both got to bond over the 3 days and still get on like a house on fire. Anyway, the creepy encounter was actually not an encounter I felt it can fit in. On our second night on the train, We left our cabin around 10 p.m. to go wash up before bed after an evening full of talk and fun and getting to know each other. Our aunt too went with us, because she didn't want us to be alone in case there were creeps prowling around in the hallways. Our aunt was the last to use the restroom, and during that time my cousin and I brushed our teeth etc. I was done first and went over to look out the window facing out, because this was my first time on a train and the train had slowed down because apparently we were passing through another city's train station. I wanted to see if we would stop and if I could make out what kind of people would board. It was coming to a crawl, and I was chatting idly with my cousin when the lights inside flickered, and after a moment when my vision cleared, I saw a tall, lanky old man with pasty white skin and a long white beard with his face pressed to the window. It shouldn't have been possible because the train was still moving, even if it was slow, and he couldn't have been able to move along so smoothly. Apparently I wasn't seeing things because my cousin also saw him reflected in the mirror. The sinks were right on the opposite wall in the bathrooms where I was stood at the window, so someone washing their hands could get a view of the outside by looking in the mirror. We both looked at each other to make sure we hadn't imagined it and screamed, and our aunt rushed out of the stall, worried and frantic that someone tried to grab us or something. Admittedly, she was kinda annoyed that we had yelled about nothing. She was convinced we were just imagining things, and she washed up and took us back to our cabin. Anyway, that was my scary encounter and I hope to never see that old man again. I was sitting in a coffee shop when an older man approached me. He sat down at my table and struck up a conversation with me. He wanted to know all sorts of stuff. We chatted for a while and then it got around to how old I was. He was shocked I was older, and once he found out, he got up and left. I was glad he was gone. I went to pay my tab and the barista asked me if that old guy was bothering me. I told him not really, but I was glad he left. A day later, I was at a strip club with my boyfriend and that guy was there. He approached me again and offered me $500 to go up on stage and strip. I declined. He struck up a conversation again with me. He told me he was a Vietnam vet and then let me know he had killed a lot of women and children. He told me he liked to rape them and then slit their throats. I noped the fuck out of there. I ran back to my boyfriend and told him what the guy said, but the guy was gone by the time the bouncer went to look for him. A day later the news broke that somebody had been killed downtown. A young girl. Someone had stabbed her in the throat from behind, dragged to an alley and raped her while she bled out. I worked with the chief of police's daughter. She told us to watch out because her dad said there was a serial killer running around. She said that this person was traveling 40 and they suspected he was some sort of traveling salesman. That guy told me that he was a traveling salesman going between Asheville and Indianapolis. He liked to stop in small towns and meet women. I never saw him again after that. I think it was him, though. Went shopping with my kids. My 8 and 9-year-old girls got a milkshake, so they waited outside a closed shop for me. A guy sitting across them immediately started smiling at my daughter like a creep. He was staring at her with a horrible smile. She is very pretty and tall and had long brown hair. Her sister is equally as pretty but is shorter and had cut her hair very short so she looked like a boy. I told myself not to be paranoid, but after going back and forth from the shop I brought them in with me. I walked in front of my girls. I tried making eye contact with the creepy guy, but he kept staring at my daughter. By the time we left the store he was gone, but I felt so paranoid decided just to go to a bookstore right by the bus stop. Let my kids go to the kids section and followed them down. I normally don't and go upstairs to second-hand part of the store. After a few minutes I start to feel very uncomfortable and tell kids it's time to go. Turn around and creepy guy is stood between two aisles with a kid's book in his hands just staring at my daughter. Grabbed kids and got a cab home. Don't know if he followed us or just a coincidence, but was definitely a warning sign to always keep my eyes on my kids. Thankfully kids were oblivious. My friend and I would drive all over the place at night when we were teenagers just to get out of the house. We would take friends to this creepy, shady part of town to scare them. There was a whole neighborhood that was completely abandoned. I'm talking couches and refrigerators in the cul-de-sacs, broken windows and doors, toys and shoes in the lawns. No idea why this neighborhood was empty, but we would make up stories about mass murderers wiping out the neighborhood, scare ourselves crazy and go home. All in good, teenager fun back in the early 2000s. One night we were driving down the main road of the neighborhood and passed by an older man on the side of the road. He waved, and for some reason, probably because it was creepy, a random man was walking in this neighborhood after dark. We thought it would be wild to turn around and drive by him again. When we did, the guy had moved off the sidewalk of the main road and was standing beside a house, naked from the waist down and masturbating. We were 16-17-year-old females at the time and completely freaked out. We had to drive by him once more to get out of the neighborhood, and he was doing the same thing, only closer to the road. We didn't go back to that neighborhood again for months. When we finally did, during the day, they had demolished all the houses. I think I saw a vision of my cousin's death. I was driving back from my now ex-girlfriend's place late on a Thursday night, and I kept replying this odd story in my mind as I drove that a motorcycle or ATV kind of thing flipped over the median and smashed into my car. It pinned me to the driver's seat of my car and I got super cold and called for dad, which was weird cause if I was injured I'd call mom. Dad works shift work and often can't answer the phone. Eventually in the story in my head I ended up getting so cold I closed my eyes and it would repeat over and over again. It repeated till Saturday afternoon and then it stopped. It was literally all I thought about till Saturday. Saturday night I got a call from my mom. My cousin, the only one my age, had died in an avalanche. He was found with his snowmobile pinning him to a tree 3 meters under the snow. He froze to death, and after his friends called for help, the first person they called was his dad because he was closer to him than his mom. To this day there's still some weird shit that happens that makes me believe in spirits and ghosts. It's been a year and a bit since it happened. I was around 11/12 back in the 80s. There was a little corner cafe close to where I lived and I used to go there after school to play arcade games. People would often stand there and watch you play, or we'd take turns etc. Sometimes other kids, sometimes adults. The one day an older guy, mid-20s or so, stood there and watched me play for a good hour and then suddenly asked if I liked Coke. As in the soft drink. Sure, I said and proceeded to put another coin in for another game. Well, I have some Coke in my app and I live right above the store. Stop by when you're done and I'll give you some. Okay man, will do. He left. I kept on playing, not intending to go anywhere near his app for whatever reason he had in mind. About 30 minutes later he was back down again and wanted to know why I hadn't come up yet. I told him I'm just finishing my game. He said okay and left. I ran home soon as he was out of sight, didn't go back to that place for quite a while. I was living in Baton Rouge during the early 2000s when Derek Toddley was active in the city. I've shared the story before here, so I'll copy/paste my other post. At the time, I was dating a girl who roughly fit the physical profile of the victims. She was house sitting for her aunt and uncle who lived in a mansion on the LSU lakes, and one evening she calls me while driving back to their house from errands and she is crying. There's someone following me, a white pickup truck. At this point the suspect was believed to be driving exactly this. I've started driving around in circles and it's still following me. I grabbed my roommate and we were out the door. He drove and made the 20-minute drive to her aunt's house in 8 minutes. When we were approaching the interstate exit I called and told her to head to the house. She was freaking out, he was still behind her, but she got to the house and ran inside. A minute later we pull up just as 2 houses down, on the opposite side of the street a white pickup parks. I run in and check on her and she confirms it is that truck that's been following her. Ask my roommate to get my back and head out there, go give a rap to the hood of the truck and trying my best to look/sound intimidating I just stare the driver down and say you gotta get out of here buddy. I don't know what you want, but you gotta get out of here. The driver nervously eyes me and drives off. I'm thinking, another stupid LSU student, a misunderstanding, she lost track of the car following her and this is just some guy parking here just a few houses down from the famed submarine races parking spot on the lakes. I didn't see the guy again in person but I recognized him when I saw him nearly a year later when the cops perp walked Derek Toddley, arresting him as the Baton Rouge serial killer. I saw the man I made eye contact with that night and realized what I stopped and how I didn't take seriously someone who was capable of murder many times over. My creepiest encounter is kind of a odd one. I had left this girl's house late one night and stopped at a gas station to grab some Copenhagen. I saw these 2 guys staring me down while I was inside. I didn't worry about it but made sure to keep my eyes open. I went back to my truck parked in front of the gas station doors and see these 2 guys bolt out a few seconds after me and hop in their car parked at the pumps behind my truck. I keep an eye on them and they're just sitting there watching me. I wait about 5 minutes and turn on my truck. They immediately turn on their car. I sat for another 10 minutes unsure if I'm being paranoid or if I should call 911. I'm not sure why but I see headlights pulling into the parking lot on my left. I turned and saw red and blue lights on top followed by another city cop and 2 more sheriff's deputies. As soon as those cars pulled in those guys in that car speed out of the parking lot onto the main road cutting off an all-black unmarked Dodge Charger that immediately turns on red and blue lights. I've never felt so lucky before in my life. I carry and had my Glock 21 with me that night but I am so glad I never had to use it. I was 19 and it was winter. I was up way too late at 3 a.m. fooling around on the computer in the living room. The doorbell rings. That right there was creepy. but I checked and some guy was on the porch. I felt pretty wary, but it was January and cold as only the Midwest can be. So just ignoring the guy didn't seem right. Also, the doorway had an inner and outer door. So if I only opened the inner door, if I wanted to pull anything funny he'd have opened the outer door himself and that would give enough time to slam the door shut and lock it. So I open the inner door and the guy is pretty grateful to find someone up. He quickly starts asking me to follow him and help him with his broken down car. Sketchy as hell. I try asking where his car is and he can't explain in an understandable fashion. He sees that I'm reluctant and pleads that his kids are in the car. This guy is trying way too hard to get me to follow him into the dark of night. I tell him to hold on a minute, close and lock the door, and go wake up my grandpa to see what he thinks I should do. He, wisely, tells me to call the cops. Let them deal with the guy. I go back to the living room and through the still locked and closed door tell the guy I'm calling the police. He says he'll go back to his car and wait and wandered off. I proceeded to call the cops. I never heard anything more, but I'm glad I listened to my good sense and my grandpa. Several years later I was living in a different state and chilling at home late one night. Suddenly I hear a woman scream, "No! Don't touch me! Just outside!" I grabbed my shoes and a flashlight and ran outside. I looked around for a few minutes and didn't see anyone. Went back inside and called the police. Never heard anything more. In that same town I came out of my apartment one morning and found a rabbit with its heart cut out on the doorstep of the apartment next door. I later found out my neighbor was sheltering a friend trying to hide from a psycho ex. Once me and my friend, at the time 17, were hanging out on the rooftop of a mall. It was a garden, when this homeless man came along and started talking to us. We tried to be polite and listen to what he had to say, and he started talking about this woman he was in love with and how he can't see her for some reason or other. He had a bag which he opened and offered us items, such as markers and other things he'd found. I decided to take a small clock, which was definitely stolen, and my friend asked for a cigarette. He later threw it out cause he didn't trust it being broken. He kept saying how cute of a couple we were, and my friend kept telling him I had someone already. When he would talk he would be right up in our faces and it was super uncomfortable. We soon escaped and talked to some friends about it. Turns out he was a pedo who kept hitting on kids around the mall. He didn't really hit on us, but it was really weird that he started talking to us while we were minding our business. So this happened to my little brother, however throughout the years he's brought it up and we both get heaved out. We were traveling back home via bus. I was 12 and he was 8 years / at the time. We were sitting next to each other on the first row. He says that around midnight and while I was asleep, I get very car sick and take pills to knock the F out. The bus driver asked him to sit on the steps leading up to the bus. So he did. As he recalls, the bus driver was making him laugh and just asking general questions. Then he asked him, in what he describes as a low and neutral voice, "Want to drive? You can come sit on my lap and I'll let you take over the wheel." My brother contemplated it, but opted not to, because in his very innocent childlike mind, he was afraid he'd crash the bus. The driver persisted once or twice more, saying he would be careful and help him. But thankfully, my brother said no. They talked a bit more, but after a few minutes the driver told him it would be safer if he went back to his seat. WTF. In retrospect, he feels that the bus driver was probably thinking of doing something much more sinister if he had sat on his lap. The bus was pitch black inside as most everyone was sleeping. Driving through rural areas for hours with no city lights or cars. We often say that the driver would have probably threatened him with something such as, "If you move or scream we will crash the bus and you will be blamed for it." Maybe we are wrong for thinking that way lol, but seriously, what grown man asks a random kid to drive a bus full of people? Talk about creeper. Used to live in a now war zone, third world country because of my father's work. We lived in a relatively good area. The first time we got robbed, my brother let the cat out of his room at about 3 a.m. as she was making a scene. That obviously scared the intruders and they legged it. We came downstairs and we found all of our stuff damaged. We ended up getting some bars put on the windows downstairs. Up the road from us, Canadian ice hockey player Troy Gamble lived and he had been getting broken into as well. A few times he even attacked the intruders, and I believe one time, it was his supposed guard. Anyway, there were some, looking back, sketchy so-called policemen that lived up the road from us. Dad used to regularly drop them down the dirt road out of kindness so they could get the bus to work. One night, when it was just my mother and I, we drove home and these policemen came up to us and suspiciously asked if we had a dog because there had been a lot of break-ins recently. We naively said no. I felt sus about it all though. That night, I decided to sleep with her in the rent's bed. We both literally woke up both at the same time after hearing what sounded like the cat playing with the key to the balcony door, right in front of Rent's room. However, it ended up being glass smashed. I told my mother I just saw a guy with black boots walk under our bedroom door, the little thin line where you can see. She was so angry, so she got up, ran down the stairs determined to see who it was. He told my mom to stop yelling as my mom was screaming and panicking. I was standing upstairs, holding onto the staircase in pure shock. He ran up, pushed me out of the way and just jumped off the balcony. Mom and I ran over to see where he went and he was gone, couldn't find him. They used a massive ladder to get onto our balcony that could have only been put there with more than one guy. Occasionally Mom would say she would see a guy wandering around the area that looked like him. We then got bars put on the upper windows, which I felt a bit safer about. He eventually got caught after the war broke out and had apparently robbed 4 houses that night. Don't mean to cry wolf, but unfortunately, 12 years later, I still suffer from PTSD every now. Writing this now is even triggering it. We all have creepy instances, but this one trumped it. This is mild compared to the horror stories I've seen here, but it was the scariest encounter for me, not because of terrible events but because of what was said to me. I was 12 and was given a letter addressed to me by my school tutor when I was in school. It was anonymous, asking to meet at lunchtime in the nurse's office. I didn't think much of it, but I did think it was odd that I wasn't notified beforehand. So, I headed to the nurse's office at the appointed time and went in. The nurse was the one who had asked to see me. Now, there were 2 things wrong with this. Firstly, I am female and the nurse was male. That wasn't a problem, but the office was a sick room, so the glass is always foggy to give students privacy when they're ill. This means that, according to school guidelines, because we were opposite genders, there was supposed to be a chaperone in the room because we could not be seen from outside the room, so there had to be another person with us for safety reasons. Secondly, my parents knew nothing of this meeting. Staff members of that school were required to tell my parents in advance if they were meeting me. This nurse didn't do that, so my parents were shocked about the incident when I told them later. The nurse asked me questions about my anxiety and I answered them honestly. After finishing, he recommended Kuth and Cams for it. Okay, fair enough. No problem there. Then, after knowing me for a grand total of 15 minutes, he concluded, and I quote, "You are clearly mentally ill." I was terrified. I was only 12, so I didn't know much about mental illness. I was having visions of asylums and rehabilitation centers. He dismissed me and I spent the rest of the day in psychological agony, wondering if there was something wrong with me, if I was going to be taken away and locked up somewhere. My parents were horrified when I told them later and sent a very strongly worded email to school. The headmistress heard about it and was equally horrified. I am happy to report that the nurse did not get away with his dreadful conduct. In fact, she apparently fired him on the spot, which surprised me. I thought that only happened in movies. Oh, and the mental illness he was so certain I had? It was autism, but I don't consider that a mental illness. Either way, the terrible stress I got from the whole Sorry saga made it my creepiest encounter. I was 18 and had just started college. I didn't have a car at the time, so I took the bus and light trail to school. The bus stops were a few blocks from my house at the time, so I had to walk along busy streets before I would enter my neighborhood. Cars would honk at me frequently and I would get people catcalling me and whatnot, but I tried not to let it bother me and just ignored them as much as I could. Now, one time these 2 dudes crawled real slow in their car next to me and were actively trying to get me in their car, saying things like "I'll take you to lunch, it's all on me," and flashed a fat wad of cash at me. I declined everything they offered and continued walking, feeling kind of anxious about the situation. They laughed and drove away and I thought that was the last I would see them. Nope. The next week I'm on my normal route home and a car pulls over onto the side of the road in front of me and it was the same dudes from the week before, just in a different car. One of them came out of the car and approached me, and he looked genuinely upset with me. He asked me why I haven't called him yet. He shouted his number to me the week before and I pretended to put it in my phone so they would leave, and then it was kind of fucked up that I lied to him. He thought I was cool. Again, I don't even know these guys. But he acted as though I had insulted him and hurt his feelings by not calling him. I just kinda stood away from him and apologized, cause I was young and scared and wasn't sure what to do. He kinda grumbled and got back in the car and drove away. Luckily, I never saw those guys again. Definitely creeped me out at the time since they recognized me on sight on the street. In my sophomore year, there was a popular kid who would always come over to my desk and try to look at what I was doing on my laptop. I was really insecure and quiet, so I didn't want him to look and he would tease me about it. He would come up from behind me and give me a massage and rub my arms, despite me literally yelling for him to get off of me. And the teacher wouldn't intervene. The creepy part of this is I recognized him on Tinder one day, swiped right just to see, and it wasn't a match, so I moved on. Later that night I got a new match, seeing it was him. And his first message to me was, "Aren't you the girl from webpage design with the stiff shoulders?" I unmatched him immediately. I'm an 18-year-old guy from the Netherlands. One time I was in a pub really wasted. It was really late, so I decided to pee and then go home. I walked into the restroom and there was this guy peeing in an urinary, and he was looking behind him staring into my eyes. He was middle-aged. I was really drunk and was laughing because it's kind of an unwritten rule to not look at each other while peeing. I closed the door and sat on the toilet when he knocked at the door. I was really drunk but realized WTF this guy was doing. When I was done, he was out of the restroom. I took my jacket and went home. Outside the pub, the same guy was facing towards the entrance, clearly waiting for me. I went to get my bicycle and he started following me. I knew something was wrong. Even though I was really drunk, I instantly became sober. I went into a little side alley where I knew some friends would be. He followed me into the side alley, which is weird because you would only go there if you had to do something there. Luckily my friends were there and I told them this guy was following me. I decided to chill with them and the man walked past. I stayed there for 15 minutes and never saw the man again. I think that guy was some sort of child molester or something. I think he was gay too, which is fine, but not if you start following people 20 years younger. Our city was celebrating the NBA championship win. I was jumping around cheering, yelling and waving as cars honked on by. There were a lot of people doing the same, but it's the city's tradition. Cars honk and the streets become an instant parade late into the night. As I was cheering, a limousine stops the parade and a man, 40-ish, white, business attire, rolls the window down and signals for me. People stop and stare. I try and ignore it, however he continues to call for me and random strangers practically push me to go. As I got closer, he says, "Hi there, how are you doing?" Me, "Good, just out here celebrating." Him, "Well, why don't you join us for some cocktails?" Me, "No tie, I'd rather stay and cheer." Him, "Are you sure? It will be fun." Me, "No thanks." I started to walk backwards a bit. Man, "Well, have fun, but be safe out here, okay?" And before rolling window back up, he looked me up and down, which simply creeped me TF out. Ike, if he was just a rich dude, if he was a sports manager and I missed my opportunity to become an NBA wife, or if I avoided a sketchy possible sex trafficking situation. We'll always wonder what would have happened if I had gone. Oh, when we talked, I did manage to peek further in and saw 3 to 4 men. I vividly remember how I found it unsettling just how damn quiet they were. No conversation amongst themselves. It's as if they were just waiting to see what the interaction would lead to. I was 14 years /0 at the time and definitely looked it. Creepy for sure. 1. When my cousin and I were about 5, we were watched playing by a couple in a car. My mom called us in from the front doorstep and they stared us down as we walked past them. My mom picked up the phone in view of the window and they burned rubber out of there immediately. 2. I was walking back down the street to my nan's house from the shop on the corner of the street. My nan lived at the far end of the street, and as I came out of the shop in my football kit, I was about 9, so proper full kit wanker, and this guy in a car leered at me and then started matching my pace as I walked. He asked where I was going and if I needed a lift. Luckily my great aunt lived like 3 houses from the shop, so I said, "No, it's fine, I live here." I walked up and knocked on the window and the fucker sat there watching and laughing to himself as I waited for the door to open. Then my uncle, great aunt's son, who's pretty big, opened up and he tore down the street. 3. Not me but my cousin, had a group of Asian guys approach him while on his bike and ask if he wanted to see the squirrels they'd caught in the back of their van. Cuz said no thanks, and then the side panel on the van flew open and a dude tried to grab my cousin as he pedaled furiously across the field behind him. 4. Me and aforementioned cousin playing on the grounds of his school trying to catch frogs and newts when we were approached by 2 older kids. We'd have been about 10, them about 14, and one of them had a glove on with nails pushed through the knuckles. They asked what we were doing, and while my cousin answered, I hauled ass. I went to the nearest house but no answer, so I ran to his parents' house and banged the door. I dragged my uncle half screaming half crying to his car, telling him what was going on, and we went to fetch him. He was walking back down the road with a bloody nose. Kid without the glove punched him a couple of times. 5. When I was 17, I got a taxi back to my mom's after a night out. I told him to drop me at the end of the street and jumped out. 2 houses from mine, a car turned into the cul-de-sac and slowed behind me. I got to my drive and walked up and 3 black lads jumped out, all with concealed faces and one carrying a wrench. I remember thinking I can't unlock the door and let them in. I had a little brother with a nervous disposition at the best of times. They asked if I lived there and I said no, it's my girl's house, I live next door. My neighbors happened to be having a massive party thanks to moving in, so I talked to them as I walked between them and round to my neighbor's front door. I knocked and no one answered, and the dude with the wrench started advancing on me, so I started to haul ass to the next house when my neighbor's gate flew open as he came out to investigate the commotion. I flew past him and he blocked the guy as he tried to get me and asked him what the fuck was going on. He said, "Fuck you. We'll get him another time," and they all jumped back in the car and drove off. That was a fun way to meet my new neighbors. It took 5 minutes for me to convince them I lived next door. 6. Heard a guy get tortured and stabbed in the flat diagonally below mine for about 20 minutes over hidden money. Then one of his attackers walked up the stairs and put his head to my door and said, "There's someone in this one." I shouted, "Fuck off now and it'll go no further. Police are on the way and I'm tooled up, so just piss off." He ran, and then I heard 2 more join him. 7. Me and the missus were outside having a drunken cigarette after a night out around 1 in the morning when I looked down the street and saw movement in the shadows about halfway down. I kept staring and a dude shuffled out with his shoulders hunched, just creeping forward slowly. He stopped just out of range of the street light and stared towards us. I whispered to my missus to go fetch my ball peen and she ran in and got it. I slipped it in my back pocket and walked to the end of the driveway and extended my arms in the universally acknowledged "come on then" gesture. He took a step back and then leaned his back against a wall and then snapped his head back toward me quickly. I walked 2 more steps when he speed walked up the street and crossed the road. He didn't do this normally. He walked to the very end of the pavement, stopped, turned, walked into the road, stopped halfway in the road, turned towards us, looked for a second until I stepped forward again, and then turned and walked away. It was so weird. It was like was trying to sneak up on us.